Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Zoe, a member of the ICCT communications team. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to our website and to YouTube in the next few weeks. Everyone has their microphones on mute. If you have any questions, you can write them in the questions box on the control panel to the right of your screen. After the presentation, we will have a few minutes to answer questions from the audience. Today, we're going to talk about at-the-pump costs of hydrogen fuel in India in 2030 and 2050, presented by Yuanrong Zhou. Yuanrong is a researcher on the ICCT fuels team. Her work focuses on techno-economic performances and life cycle carbon intensity of alternative fuel pathways.
Thank you, Zoe, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. So today I will present a recent study that we just published on the hydrogen cost in India. So let me share my slides with you guys. Okay. So why we care about hydrogen? Hydrogen to be used as a fuel is getting an increasing amount of interest globally, especially in the transport sector. And this is because of the potential climate and environmental benefits that it could provide. When hydrogen is combusted in fuel cell, it only emits water vapor and oxygen. So this means that there would be no tailpipe pollutant emissions. And in addition, there is some flexibility in the hydrogen system, like hydrogen could be transmitted in either gaseous or liquid form through pipeline or through truck. And it could also be produced from multiple feedstocks and technologies. And this graph here shows some of the common production pathways. So at the top, hydrogen can be produced from either natural gas or from biomethane through the technology of steam methane reforming. And you may also have heard the terminology of blue hydrogen, which is hydrogen made from natural gas combined with carbon capture and storage. And the second chunk of technology is gasification. And for that, both coal and biomass can be used as the feedstock. And last is water electrolysis. And in this case, electricity is the energy source. It could be either from the grid or from a renewable electricity. And if hydrogen is produced from 100% renewable, then it is also known as green hydrogen. So using hydrogen in transport is in line with multiple policy goals in India. So first of all, India has very ambitious targets in reducing its greenhouse gas and air pollutant emissions, and the transportation sector would be a key to meet those national targets. And so far in India, hydrogen is being used in the transport sector, but its use is limited to blending a very small amount of hydrogen with compressed natural gas. And this blended fuel is known as hydrogen. So while the purpose of using hydrogen is to reduce emissions from CNG vehicles, but there have been some debates on whether hydrogen can really reduce emissions, especially the NOx and greenhouse gas emissions. So therefore, using pure hydrogen in fuel cell vehicle might be a better alternative. And second, deploying hydrogen in transport can also ensure the energy independence that is a priority on the government's agenda. Fuel cell is more energy efficient than conventional combustion engines. So this means that the required amount of fuel to travel the same distance would be smaller for hydrogen. And in other words, hydrogen could displace a great amount of petroleum, which it would be in line with India's goal of reducing oil imports. And last, India has abundant renewable resources that could be used for green hydrogen production. And as a matter of fact, just last year, India has released a national hydrogen mission, and that policy document is seeking to scale up green hydrogen production domestically. But despite the several advantages of hydrogen as a transport fuel, it is still an emerging industry, and its economics will significantly affect its uptake. So the purpose of this study is to estimate the at the pump price of hydrogen that the consumers would need to pay for in India. And this at the pump price is consisting of 4 cost components, which are hydrogen production cost, hydrogen transport cost, fueling station cost, and the tariffs that collected along the hydrogen supply chain. And in this study, we model the production cost for both blue and green hydrogen, since these are the 2 hottest hydrogen pathways. And we assume hydrogen is to be transported from its production site to the fueling stations through dedicated hydrogen pipelines. And we estimate the levelized hydrogen fueling station cost with some assumptions in the fueling demand. And last, we include the possible taxes along the supply chain that the fuel consumers may end up paying for. And we use 3 cities in India as the case studies, and the time frame of the cost estimates is 2030 and 2050. And now I will give a brief overview regarding the methodology being used in this study. So for green hydrogen, we adopt a cash flow model to estimate the levelized production cost. And to build this model, our team has conducted a comprehensive literature review on electrolysis cost and also developed several different scenarios for future techno-economic outlook. And electricity is a very important input to the cost modeling for green hydrogen. And in this study, we assume solar is being used, and we collected the past solar prices for the 3 cities in India. And since India has ambitious plans in scaling up solar capacity and also has implemented multiple programs to get solar price down, so for the future projection of solar price, we assume a relatively optimistic outlook. And the past and future solar prices that we used in this study are shown in the table here. And besides the decrease in solar price, we also expect that cost would reduce in the electrolysis system as the market matures. And we've developed 2 outlook scenarios for electrolysis, a mid-level scenario and an optimistic scenario. And for blue hydrogen, we have collected the cost information on the technology of steam methane reforming and carbon capture and storage. And we assume future SMR and CCS cost would stay at the current level. This is because for SMR, it is already commercially mature. And for CCS, it is very uncertain regarding like how the cost is going to change in the future. So in the projection of future blue hydrogen cost, the only cost component that varies with time is the natural gas price. And we have taken multiple steps to estimate the retail natural gas price for industrial users in India. And these steps are reflected in the table here. So first, we collected the historical wholesale natural gas price in India. And we also collected both historical and forecasted natural gas price from an international benchmark. And this benchmark is being used when India sets its market-linked natural gas price domestically. And we then make a regression between these 2 data sets and project the future wholesale natural gas price in India, which are the values in the top row of the table. And with that, we apply a value-added tax for the industrial consumers. And besides the natural gas price, the consumers would also need to pay for the cost of transporting natural gas. And to account for that cost, we collected the unified transmission tariff for natural gas pipelines in India and added the relevant tax. So the sum of the wholesale price and the transmission cost would give us the retail price of natural gas in India. And moving on to the cost of transporting hydrogen from the production site to the fueling stations. we need to consider both pipeline length and the hydrogen demand in order to get a levelized per kilogram hydrogen transport cost. So first, we expect that both transmission and distribution pipelines are needed and collected the per meter cost of building those pipelines from previous studies. And next, we estimate a possible pipeline length in each of the three case study cities in India. And from this process, we get a total pipeline cost, which is then divided by the hydrogen demand to get a levelized per kilogram cost. And the assumption of hydrogen demand has to do with the fueling station configurations. And here is regarding the assumptions for the fueling stations. So we assume each of the three cities would start with 10 hydrogen fueling stations in 2030, and each station has a fueling capacity of 400 kilogram hydrogen per day. And these assumptions are based on some international experience. And looking out to 2050, we expect a growing demand as the market matures, and additional fueling stations with higher capacity would be needed. And we collected fueling station construction and maintenance costs from previous studies, and we also added a hydrogen purification cost at the fueling stations, since the fuel cell vehicles has a very high requirement for the hydrogen purity. And last, we consider possible tariffs that are to be collected along the supply chain. And this formula here summarizes how we reach the at the pump hydrogen price. Now let's look at the results. So in this figure, we show the final at the pump hydrogen price for both blue and green hydrogen, as well as a cost breakdown for the four cost components. And these numbers are averaged across the three case study cities in India. And for green hydrogen, the cost is based on a mid-level outlook. And there are several key takeaways from these results. So first of all, although you may see that blue hydrogen is cheaper in the near term, but green hydrogen is going to be better off in the future. And we estimate that the two types of hydrogen are likely to have similar price before 2050. So like in 2050, we estimate the at the pump hydrogen price for both type would be a little bit lower, $5 per kilogram hydrogen. And particularly, we estimate that the production cost of green hydrogen is likely to decrease by 45% from 2030 to 2050. And the second major finding is that regardless of hydrogen type and the time frame that we're looking at, production cost is going to be the biggest contributor to the final price. So this indicates that the key to make hydrogen a cost competitive fuel is to provide policy support in hydrogen production. And a third finding is that the improved capacity utilization is a key to reduce hydrogen infrastructure costs, especially for the hydrogen transport cost through pipeline. So the green hydrogen production cost I just showed in the previous slide is based on a mid-level outlook. But here we present an optimistic scenario which considers an even smaller electrolysis cost. And using this optimistic scenario, green hydrogen production cost is going to be 40% cheaper than the mid-level outlook. So like from a optimistic scenario, we estimate that the green hydrogen production cost might be as low as $2 per kilogram hydrogen by 2050. And here in this table, we compare our results with previous studies that also estimate hydrogen cost in India. One is from the Indira Gandhi Institute of Developmental Research, and the other from the Energy and Resources Institute. So one thing I should note up front is that the modeling scope as well as the methodology differ among the three studies. So it is relatively hard to make apple-to-apple comparisons, but I will just mention a few key findings. So first, on hydrogen produced from natural gas, which are the top two rows in the table. For the production cost from IDIGR, it's the lowest. And this is because that study did not really include CCS in its model. So basically, it was not really modeling blue hydrogen, but just hydrogen produced from natural gas. And for that study, it also assumed a much lower natural gas price. So that's why the production cost for hydrogen produced from natural gas is the lowest. And for TERI, the production cost is also lower than ours, even though it indeed was included CCS and meaning that it indeed modeled for blue hydrogen. And it actually had a higher natural gas price, but the production cost in the end is still smaller than our result. And one major reason is that TERI assumed the SMR cost to decrease in the future, but we assumed that it would stay at current level. And moving on to electrolysis hydrogen, IDIGR's production cost is the highest, and this is because of the significantly higher electricity that they assumed when the study carried out more than a decade ago. And for TERI's and our study, we have very close estimates for future solar price in India. But however, the green hydrogen production cost by TERI is still lower than even our optimistic scenario. And this is because TERI used a very aggressive projection in electrolysis cost reduction that they collected from the IEA projection. And regarding pipeline cost and fueling station cost, although the numbers from these studies are relatively close, but we find that the underlying assumptions, especially the pipeline length and demand, can be very different. But that difference got canceled out when we are calculating the levelized per kilogram hydrogen cost. So that was all about hydrogen cost. But I would also like to talk a little bit about the life cycle greenhouse gas intensity of different hydrogen pathways. So you might still remember that in the beginning of the presentation, I said that hydrogen has zero tailpipe emissions. However, whether hydrogen can really contribute to the decarbonization of the transport sector actually depends on its whole life cycle GHG emissions, including the emissions from the upstream. So in a study that we published last year, we evaluated 8 hydrogen pathways in Europe, and there are 3 key takeaways from that study. So first, there is a high risk of fossil-based hydrogen, even if it's combined with CCS. So the 2 fossil-based pathways from natural gas or from coal are highlighted in the red box. And if we look at the blue bar, which is the most representative value, then these 2 pathways cannot really reach deep decarbonization. And if we look at the top of the arrow bar, then the worst case of these 2 hydrogen pathways is no better than fossil fuel. And second finding is that there is huge uncertainty in methane leakage, and high leakage rate can make natural gas or biomethane-based pathways even worse than fossil fuel. And last, electrolysis hydrogen using grid has a much higher emission than using renewable electricity. So this really emphasizes the need of policy support that is devoted to renewables used for hydrogen production. So in conclusion, we found that among the multiple hydrogen pathways, green hydrogen probably is the long-term solution, not only from an economic perspective, but also from a climate perspective for India. And not to mention that India has substantial renewable resources and is already making great efforts in scaling up renewables. So we do see that there is a great potential for green hydrogen in India and to be used as a decarbonization fuel for the transport sector. However, green hydrogen is still very expensive, especially in the near term, and would require policy support to reach cost competitiveness. And for that, India probably can borrow its existing experience in the solar market. And some of the policy options include like grant funding program and also favorable tax policies. And last, increased hydrogen demand would enable greater utilization and drive the hydrogen infrastructure cost down. So policies that support early market development of fuel cell vehicles as well as hydrogen infrastructure would be helpful. And that's all my presentation today. Thank you very much all for your attention, and I will now hand it back to Zoe.
Thank you so much, Yuanrong, for that great presentation. Now we will move to the Q&A section of the webinar. Remember, if you have questions, you can write them in the questions box on your control panel, and we will answer as many as we can. First question here, have you considered blending hydrogen into natural gas pipelines? What does that look like?
Thanks for your question. We did not model hydrogen blending in natural gas pipeline in this study, but we only modeled the cost of hydrogen dedicated pipeline. But just to give some context, there is a blending limit of hydrogen in the natural gas pipeline, and that is about up to 20% of hydrogen. So this means that blending hydrogen in natural gas pipeline probably cannot really help to meet the large demand that is likely to happen in the future. And also, the hydrogen purification cost would be significantly higher if the concentration of hydrogen from the pipeline is really low. So this means this is because the fuel cell vehicle requires almost 100% purity of hydrogen. But so if the hydrogen concentration from the pipeline is very low, then the purification cost would increase significantly.
Great, thank you. Another question here, have we also considered the scenario for decentralized hydrogen production across different regions within India and consumption within the region?
In this study, we haven't considered the decentralized scenario for India. So like in this study, we only considered the central production of green hydrogen, and then it's transported into to the filling stations. But in other studies, we are also looking into on-site electrolysis for the context of Europe, not for India specifically. So the advantage of having on-site electrolysis is that it could avoid the transportation cost of hydrogen. And I think I've seen from other studies that like some researchers found out the final at the pump cost of on-site electrolysis versus central production is a little bit similar. Maybe a little bit cheaper for the on-site electrolysis, but we haven't really done our own modeling for India.
Great, thank you. Another question here, which electrolyzer technology did you use in this study?
So we modeled 3 types of electrolyzer, including alkaline, PEM electrolyzer, and SOE. And they all have very different capital cost and energy efficiency. But we expect the cheapest type is going to be used in a given year. So basically, the result from this study reflects whichever the cheapest electrolyzer technology is.
Great. It looks like we have time for about one more question. I have this one here. What are the assumptions you made for volumes of hydrogen transported and what for distribution?
So for the volume of hydrogen to be transported, it's based on the assumptions for the fueling stations. So in the fueling station assumption, we assume that there would be 10 stations with 400 kilogram hydrogen per day capacity. So like the total would be in 2030. So the total of that amount is going to be the amount to be transported in 2030. And for 2050, we assumed a increasing hydrogen demand, which are like 20 filling stations with the capacity of 400 kilogram hydrogen per day, and another 30 stations with a 1,000 kilogram hydrogen per day. So the sum of that would be the sum of that 50 filling stations would be the total hydrogen demand in 2050. So these are not really the actual projection of what the hydrogen demand is going to look like in India, like from a macroeconomic integrated model assessment. These assumptions are just based on some past experience from like other regions in the world, especially California, like what was the market look like when they first started develop the fuel cell vehicle market. So we followed that experience and did the assumption. So that would be the amount for hydrogen to be transported through the pipeline.
Great. I think I'm going to do one more. The majority of green hydrogen initially will be directed toward industrial use. Is that considered in this study, and will the cost be different in that case?
Yeah, in this study, we haven't really looked into other sectors, but just focused on what it's going to look like for the transport sector. But I could say that because our model is doing a cash flow model to analyze the levelized cost of hydrogen production. So basically, the production cost would be the same, no matter it's for which sector is going to be used. But then it's the difference contributes would be and then the transport the cost of transporting hydrogen from the production side to other end users should be like look similar. Also, like there should be different underlying assumptions for the demand and the distance of transportation. So and then the major difference between the other sectors is that for the transport sector, we need to consider the fueling station cost, but that cost probably doesn't really apply to other end uses. So I would say that's the only difference that could contribute to the to different sectors. But then from the upstream, the cost should look similar.
Thank you. It looks like we have run out of time for questions, but thank you so much everyone for participating in today's presentation. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any further questions. And remember to follow us at the ICCT. Thanks again, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you.